The desert sun had barely begun to lift over the jagged ridges when more than 50 Apache warriors appeared silent, as shadows forming a perfect circle around a tattered canvas tent. Each rider carried something different. Some clutched hand-woven blankets, others held carved wooden charms, dried meat, or stones that glinted with an almost sacred light. Not a single word passed between them. The silence was thick enough to be felt hanging over the campsite like a living thing, and in the center of it all, a young Apache warrior named Chenoa surveyed the scene with a mixture of awe and unease. Chenoa was no stranger to danger. Barely 18, with long black hair that fell in a straight cascade down her back, and eyes sharp enough to spot a rattlesnake from 50 yards, she had earned a reputation within her band for courage and quick thinking. Yet, even she had never witnessed anything like this. Something deep within her stirred a recognition that the morning held more than the usual heat and thirst of the unforgiving West. The desert around them was merciless. The sun had already begun its slow climb, turning sand and stone into a furnace. The air shimmered with heat distorting the horizon, and every movement left a faint trail of dust rising behind it. Cacti and scrub brush offered no real shade, and the few gnarled mesquite trees that dotted the landscape did little to ease the blistering wind that carried the taste of grit and dry earth. Coyotes howled in the distance, and somewhere in the rocks the faint rattle of a snake warned of danger hidden just out of sight. Survival in this wasteland demanded vigilance, strength, and a willingness to act where others might hesitate. It was in this harsh expanse that Chenoa had discovered him, a boy no older than 14, pale and trembling, barely clinging to life. Eli, as she learned his name, had nothing to his name but a stubborn, scrawny donkey. The boy's clothes were ragged, torn in the wind and sun, and his eyes wide with fear and exhaustion darted nervously at every movement in the desert. Chenoa felt a sharp tug in her chest. She knew the rules, the boundaries her people observed. The Apache had long been wary of outsiders, especially white settlers, and crossing into certain lands or helping a foreigner could invite anger, suspicion, or even deadly conflict. But she could not turn away. The warrior code she had grown up with demanded honor, demanded that one act when another's life hung in the balance. A glance at Eli's frail form, coupled with the shallow, wheezing breaths that barely lifted his chest, made her decision inevitable. To help him was dangerous, yes. It might violate her people's strictures. It could provoke hostile men in the territory who viewed outsiders as threats. Yet doing nothing was unthinkable. Her conscience forged in the teachings of her elders, and the harshness of the plains would not allow it. Every step toward the boy felt weighted with risk. The sand burned through her moccasins, and sweat rolled in rivulets down her back. The donkey brayed nervously, kicking at the heat-baked earth, sensing its young rider's tension. Chenoa's heart pounded in rhythm with the distant rattle of lizards fleeing the heat, and the occasional wind-whipped tumbleweed that skittered like restless spirits across the plain. The silence of the desert pressed against her, making every movement and breath feel amplified, significant. As she approached Eli, she noticed the subtle details that made her hesitation almost tangible. The faint line of a bruise along his arm, the dirt crusted in his hair, the sunburned cheeks that looked far too fragile for this cruel land. And yet, amid all this vulnerability, there was a spark, an instinctive determination in the boy's eyes that mirrored her own. It was a spark that demanded action. Chenoa's mind raced through possible consequences, even as her feet carried her closer. She might face reprimand from the elders. There was the risk of encountering settlers who would see her actions as betrayal. There were rumors of high-stakes shootouts not far beyond the horizon, men armed and unforgiving. But still, the warrior in her prevailed. A life in her hands outweighed protocol politics and personal safety. She extended a hand, steady and deliberate, and spoke softly so as not to startle the boy. "Come. I will help you survive this day." In that moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Chenoa felt every ounce of tension, heat, and danger around them, yet a calm resolve took root. She had chosen her path. The sand, the sun, the silence, and the threats lurking in the shadows were all present, but none could sway her. She would stand by the boy, risking everything because honor and courage demanded it. The first step of their journey had begun, and with it a story of bravery, compassion, and the unexpected bonds forged in the unforgiving West was about to unfold. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace that seemed to bake everything it touched. Chenoa adjusted the worn leather strap across her shoulder and led Eli's donkey slowly through the blistering heat. Every step was a test of endurance. The sand burned their feet, and the horizon shimmered like a mirage. Eli sagged against the donkey, pale and trembling, his small frame barely able to bear the journey. Chenoa's hands, calloused from years of survival, guided him, carefully keeping him upright, while scanning the terrain for hidden dangers, snakes, unstable rocks, and the occasional jagged cactus that could pierce a careless ankle. The boy's breaths came in shallow, raspy gasps, and every so often he would slump forward, too weak to continue. Chenoa would steady him, murmuring in the soft, melodic tones of her Apache tongue, invoking prayers passed down through generations. The words were a mix of protection and hope, a lifeline from her people's past echoing across the arid expanse. Eli, though he could not understand the language, felt the cadence of her voice as a calm reassurance, a tether to safety in a land that offered so little mercy. For Chenoa, each moment was a careful balancing act between urgency and caution. One wrong move could send the boy tumbling, could attract unwanted attention from men who patrolled these lands with guns and suspicion. She had to anticipate the behavior of the donkey, navigate jagged stones, and keep Eli conscious, all while her own body ached from heat and fatigue. Sweat stung her eyes, sand worked its way under her clothes, and the wind carried grit that scraped at every exposed patch of skin. Yet, she pressed on, driven by the undeniable truth that a single act of courage could mean the difference between life and death. At one point, Eli's knees buckled beneath him, and Chenoa acted instinctively, wrapping a strong arm around his waist and pressing him against the donkey's flank. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice firm yet gentle. "You are stronger than you think." The boy's eyes widened in shock, a mixture of fear and awe, realizing that a stranger, an Apache no less, someone he had been taught to distrust, was risking everything for him. It was a revelation that humbled him, leaving him simultaneously helpless and profoundly grateful. Chenoa allowed herself a brief glance at the sun overhead, noting the angle of its ascent and calculating the next stretch of shade that might offer relief. Every small detail mattered: the placement of rocks, the angle of the ridges, even the faint whisper of wind that hinted at water nearby. Her mind moved swiftly between immediate survival and the larger, almost spiritual dimension of her actions. She was aware, as she had always been, that bravery in her world was not measured only by skill with a weapon, but by the willingness to protect life, even when doing so carried personal risk. As they trudged on, Chenoa whispered another prayer, this one older than any living memory she could recall. It was a soft chant meant to honor the spirits of the land, to ask their guidance in safeguarding a life that was not her own. Eli, though silent, felt the rhythm of her voice resonate deep within him. There was a sacredness in the moment, a reminder that acts of compassion could weave a bridge between hearts, between cultures, and even between generations. By the time they reached a small outcrop of rocks that offered a sliver of shade, Chenoa allowed herself a moment to breathe. Eli collapsed gently onto the sand, his gratitude unspoken but palpable in the wide, astonished look he cast toward his protector. Chenoa smiled faintly, feeling a quiet satisfaction that went beyond survival. This was more than leading a boy through a desert. This was a testament to the enduring strength of courage, the quiet power of kindness, and the way a single act of bravery could ripple outward, leaving an imprint far larger than either of them could yet comprehend. The next morning, the desert air carried a softer heat, though the sun was already climbing, scattering gold across the dunes. Chenoa guided Eli toward the heart of her people's territory, where the echoes of tradition and memory hung in the wind like whispered songs. As they approached the clearing, Eli's eyes widened, taking in a sight he could scarcely believe. 50 Apache warriors had assembled, forming a precise circle around the small tattered tent that now felt like a sacred center. No weapons were in sight. Instead, each warrior carried something meaningful: hand-woven blankets, carved tools, dried meats, protective charms, and objects that symbolized honor and belonging. At the circle's center, standing taller than the rest, was Chief Gideon Nash. His long hair, streaked with gray, framed a face lined with years of battle and wisdom. His eyes, steady and observant, radiated both authority and compassion. He nodded to Chenoa, acknowledging her presence, and then his gaze settled on Eli, who clutched the donkey's lead rope as if it were a lifeline. The boy felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. The warrior's silent strength pressed against him, yet it was not threatening. It was reverence. Chenoa stepped aside, allowing Eli to witness what would become one of the most profound experiences of his young life. One by one, the warriors approached the center. Each placed their offering carefully on the sand, then pressed a hand to their chest in a gesture of respect, a ritual acknowledgement that transcended words. The movement was deliberate, solemn, and carried a weight Eli could feel in his chest, though he could not fully understand its meaning. The chief's voice broke the silence, measured and clear. "This boy has shown courage that honors life, not just blood," Gideon Nash said. "His choice to save another, even at risk to himself, aligns with the highest principles of our people. Today, we honor him." The warriors repeated their silent gestures, their eyes conveying something Eli had never imagined: trust, acceptance, and gratitude toward someone from beyond their culture who had proven bravery and heart. As each gift was presented, Eli began to grasp the significance. The blankets symbolized protection, the tools represented self-reliance and skill. The food meant sustenance and care, and the charms carried the hope of safety and the blessing of spirits. Each item was a bridge not only between him and the warriors before him, but between the world he had always known and the one he was being welcomed into. The sacredness of the ceremony seemed to blur time, connecting the present to generations past, and Eli felt an unfamiliar swelling pride. Chenoa whispered soft prayers beside him, invoking the spirits of the land, calling for guidance and balance. Her words, though foreign in sound, resonated with Eli's spirit, adding a mystical weight to the ceremony. He could sense the invisible threads tying him to this community, threads spun from courage, honor, and respect. For a boy who had wandered the desert alone, whose life had been defined by scarcity and uncertainty, the recognition felt almost unreal. As the final warrior placed his gift before Eli, the circle tightened slightly, as if enclosing him in a shield of collective intention. The boy's heart pounded with a mixture of wonder, humility, and gratitude. He realized in that moment that a single act of kindness, his willingness to share the only thing he had with Chenoa, a stranger to him and her people, had opened the door to a connection he could never have imagined. The Apache were not just honoring him. They were affirming a principle that transcended culture. Courage and goodness in the heart of one could inspire respect and trust in many. Eli looked at Chenoa, who gave him a subtle nod, her eyes reflecting the same quiet pride that danced across the warriors' faces. It was a moment of pure human connection, unspoken, yet profound, a memory that would embed itself deep into Eli's soul. He had crossed a boundary not of distance, but of understanding, and in doing so discovered the power of honor, the weight of gratitude, and the fragile, luminous thread that binds one community to another. The morning air, once serene and filled with the ritual quiet of the Apache ceremony, was suddenly pierced by the distant thrum of hooves. Chenoa's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. Dust clouds rose, and through the shimmer of heat, she saw men riding fast and hard, their posture tense, their weapons glinting in the sun. Sterling Maddox and Logan Briggs led the group, their faces twisted with suspicion. their hands hovering near the triggers of rifles that had seen more than a few frontier skirmishes. The tension was immediate and palpable. 50 warriors had gathered in what had been a peaceful celebration of courage and honor, yet now the air seemed ready to ignite at the slightest spark. Chenoa instinctively stepped closer to Eli, her hand brushing his arm in reassurance. The boy's eyes widened with fear. He had already seen the kindness and respect of her people, and now he confronted the stark reality that their worlds were on the brink of violent collision. Captain Hayes, a seasoned officer of the territorial militia, emerged from the formation behind Maddox and Briggs. His uniform was crisp and blew a stark contrast to the earth-toned garb of Apache warriors and weathered clothes of the settlers. He rode slowly, assessing the scene with the calm, measured gaze of a man trained to keep order without unnecessary bloodshed. Hayes raised a hand in a signal of restraint, positioning his men strategically between the Apache and the approaching settlers. He understood both the danger and the significance of the moment. Chenoa took a steadying breath, feeling the heat of the sun and the weight of countless eyes upon her. She knew that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. Beside her, Eli clutched the donkey's rope, trembling but resolute. She spoke softly, whispering to him the words she had learned from the elders, words of peace, explanation, and courage. "Tell them," she urged. "Tell them why we are here. Tell them the truth, and do not falter." Eli drew a shaky breath, his small voice rising above the tension, recounting the moment that had brought him to this place. "She saved me," he called out. "I was dying in the desert, no water, no hope. Chenoa gave me her guidance, her strength, even when it could have put her in danger. She chose to help me, a stranger, and nothing more." The words cut through the thick air, carrying with them the undeniable power of honesty and courage. Slowly, some of the men's grips on their rifles loosened. Doubt flickered in their eyes. Could it be true that bravery and compassion existed even across cultural divides? The Apache warriors remained statuesque, their hands resting lightly near weapons, but unmoving, their faces stoic. It was a display of quiet authority, strength without aggression. The circle of warriors seemed to communicate silently, each glance measured, deliberate, and unwavering. The tension became almost unbearable, yet it was held in perfect equilibrium, a silent contest of wills and respect. Every observer could feel the weight of history pressing down the fragile possibility that one simple act of kindness might reshape long-held prejudices. Even Maddox and Briggs hesitated, uncertain now of what they had assumed to be an imminent threat. Captain Hayes, eyes scanning every participant, made subtle adjustments to keep the peace, but he refrained from interference, recognizing that this moment belonged to the warriors and the boy they honored. Chenoa and Eli stood at the center, living proof that a bridge could exist where before there had only been suspicion, fear, and misunderstanding. The desert wind carried a hushed tension, punctuated only by the low whinny of horses and the whisper of sand across stones, as all involved sensed that this standoff was about far more than confrontation. It was about recognizing courage and the humanity that could transcend it. The ceremony reached its quiet, profound conclusion as Chief Gideon Nash stepped forward, holding in his weathered hands a simple yet weighty token, the lead rope of Eli's donkey, adorned with a small turquoise and silver medallion. The gift was more than an object. It was a symbol of responsibility, a bridge between two worlds, a sacred acknowledgement of the courage and compassion that had brought them together. Eli's small hands closed over the rope, feeling the weight of both the gift and the trust it represented. Chief Nash's voice carried across the assembled warriors and the still watchful settlers. "What has been done today goes beyond a single life," he explained, his tone steady, deliberate, and full of authority. "This boy's action has forged a bond between our people, and his a bond that can lead to understanding, respect, and peace, where once there was only fear and suspicion." His eyes met Eli's, and the boy felt the enormity of the moment pressed gently upon him, not as fear, but as purpose. Chenoa stood beside him, proud yet quiet, her gaze sweeping over the circle of warriors. She knew that bravery and honor were not measured by size, age, or the weight of weapons in hand, but by the courage to act rightly when faced with impossible choices. Eli had done just that. A boy alone in the desert had offered what he had saved a life, and in doing so had demonstrated a truth that transcended culture. Courage and goodness are recognized wherever they appear. For the assembled settlers and militia, the lesson was undeniable. The line between enemy and ally had been blurred by one act of integrity. Even Sterling Maddox and Logan Briggs, who had arrived with suspicion and tension etched on their faces, lowered their weapons slightly, understanding, whether they admitted it or not, that honor and bravery are not confined to a single people. Captain Hayes, observing from the sidelines, allowed a faint nod, recognizing that this small ceremony could influence more than a single interaction. It could shape the way communities regarded one another for seasons to come. The lessons for anyone who witnessed the event, whether in person or through stories passed down, were clear. Courage and selflessness could challenge the deepest prejudices. Even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward, bridging gaps of culture, history, and distrust. Honor, responsibility, and integrity were not abstract ideals, but living values that could guide decisions, shape lives, and inspire others, no matter how harsh the world might seem. In a land often defined by conflict and survival, these truths were more precious than gold. Eli looked up at Chenoa, then at the chief, then across the circle of warriors. His heart swelled with gratitude, pride, and understanding. He realized that the act of saving another life had changed him, had given him purpose, and had connected him to a lineage of courage that stretched back through the generations. He understood now that his small, courageous choice could influence not just one life, but the spirit of many, leaving a mark that could endure long after the desert winds had shifted the sand. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the clearing, Chief Nash turned to the gathered audience, his voice carrying a warmth beneath its authority. "Remember this day," he said. "Remember what courage, kindness, and honor can accomplish. The world may test you, but these truths endure." And with that, the circle slowly dispersed, warriors mounting their horses, the desert returning to its quiet rhythm. Eli clutched the medallion, feeling the strength of the Apache people and the responsibility it carried. Chenoa gave him a small nod, a shared acknowledgement of the bond formed through bravery and empathy. For those watching, whether near or far, the message was unmistakable. Even in the harshest landscapes, courage and compassion could create peace. Family honor, bravery, and integrity were not relics of the past, but principles alive in every action. If the story of Chenoa and Eli inspired you, a calm voice would remind, follow epic Western stories, share your thoughts, like and comment below. Discover more tales of the frontier filled with courage, humanity, and the lessons that endure beyond the desert.